Tonight, the startling spread of the coronavirus in China. More than 1,000 new cases in a single day.
While Canadians with family in the danger zone demand help.
She's really young. I'm not sure if her immune system can take this. I feel helpless.
Other countries are evacuating citizens. So what's Canada doing?
Britain defies American pleas to ban Huawei. Will it sway Canada's decision?
Cracks in the Republicans' impeachment strategy. The former Trump ally now calling for witnesses.
Somebody take this weight away.
Rookies dominate the Junos. The new names in music you'll want to know. This is The National.
Canada is now facing another case of the coronavirus, this time on the West Coast.
All this as more than 100 Canadians in Wuhan, China, the epicenter of the outbreak, are telling Ottawa they want out as soon as possible. Their sense of urgency, understandable. Chinese officials tonight announced another alarming update. At least 132 people have now died. The number of confirmed coronavirus infections on mainland China now just under 6,000. That is hundreds more than the SARS outbreak of almost 2 decades ago, though to be sure, far less deadly. Officials in this country say the new case in BC is well under control. But as Tanya Fletcher reports, that's little comfort to many in an area where regular travel to China is very common.
We are confident that this is truly a case of this novel coronavirus.
That first case, a man in his 40s recently in Wuhan who came through Vancouver International Airport last week. He lives in Metro Vancouver and regularly travels to China for work.
This is a gentleman who was well aware of what was going on in China, and when he returned, he went home and he voluntarily self-isolated, so he had not traveled outside his home until he sought medical attention.
His family members are being closely monitored, but other people on that plane are not being contacted.
This person was not symptomatic on his flight. There's no risk to people who are in contact with somebody with no symptoms.
Health officials insist the risk of spread in BC remains low, but with more than 100 flights a week between Vancouver and mainland China, travelers are still taking precautions.
On the airplane, I will wear the mask, yeah.
Everyone have their own protection, the face masks and hand sanitizer.
Just walking around the airport, I'm seeing lots of people wearing masks, and so I'm considering buying a mask today, actually.
And masks have become a common sight in Richmond, where 55% of the city's population is Chinese. This latest case concerning for many.
People are definitely talking about this within your community?
Yes, we're talking a lot.
Henry Chow canceled his planned trip to China at the end of the month. He says friends and family here are taking their own measures to protect themselves.
We're supposed to have a lot of parties, but we kind of cancel it, and we warning each other who is just come back from China, or especially from Wuhan, please stay in your home for 14 days.
And as Canadians alter their plans, so too are airlines. Air Canada and Cathay Pacific now canceling certain flights between China and Canada while demand drops as fears of the coronavirus spread. Tanya Fletcher, CBC News, Vancouver.
Now, while Canadians here follow this closely, there are still at least 126 Canadians inside China's infected zones who want to leave as soon as possible. Other countries have moved to airlift their citizens out. Ottawa says it's working on it, but that for now, those people will have to sit tight. David Cochran now with how one family is holding up.
Chloe Fabich is 15 months old and learning to walk with her grandparents in Wuhan, stuck in a quarantine zone with her parents half a world away.
She's really young. I'm not sure if her immune system can take this.
Richard Fabich has contacted the federal government for help, but he's frustrated as he watches other countries send planes into China to carry their people out.
Right now what I'm hearing is more of the wait and see. I'd like to see the government, in an ideal scenario, evacuate their citizens from there.
All options that you said are on the table. We're just looking at the most efficient way.
Help could soon be on the way, but that doesn't mean planes are in the air or even on the runway.
We're looking also at options with different nations. As you know, different nations are looking at how they can repatriate these people back to their countries. That's the consultation we're doing right now.
Quite frankly, we don't know yet what the situation of those individuals are.
So it's not as simple as just sending a plane to bring potentially hundreds of people home. Officials need to assess the needs and health risks of each person, figure out how best to get them to Canada, and then what to do with them once they get here.
This is of utmost priority for me, is to make sure that we're protecting the health and safety of Canadians, whether they're abroad or whether they're here.
This is all happening as Fabbage boxes up his house to move from Mississauga to British Columbia, where the plan was for his family to be reunited.
With all the unknown, I have no idea how long she'll be there. And that, I think, is the scariest aspect of this.
For now, Fabbage keeps planning his move to the other side of the country, with his daughter on the other side of the world. David Cochran, CBC News, Ottawa.
Now, 99% of the global cases of the coronavirus are in China, and the story the numbers tell there is that so far the virus seems to be winning. Whether it's due to better reporting, an explosion of infections, or both, the sheer number of new cases confirmed each day seems to be snowballing. After a huge spike yesterday, the outbreak has more than doubled in size. Sasha Petrusek shows us how some are reaching the breaking point.
With the epidemic sweeping China, in Hong Kong, the public push has been for sealed borders. A kind of self-quarantine from the mainland that the Hong Kong government has been resisting. No longer. Leader Carrie Lam arrived at a news conference wearing something else she's been resisting, a face mask, which has been a symbol of months of protests here. Given the gravity of the epidemic, she says, we need to reduce the flow of people from the mainland. So trains and ferries into Hong Kong will be cancelled, flights reduced. It's a sign of the pressure everyone is feeling to do something in the face of a virus that's infecting hundreds more every day in China. In Wuhan, the epicenter of the outbreak, the rush is for foreigners to get out after almost a week of lockdown. Americans like Jacob Wilson, who spent today trying to get on the passenger list for a U.S. government charter. He didn't make it.
If there was a bigger plane that could fit everybody, I definitely want to be on it.
Japan is also sending a plane to get its citizens out, along with the European Union. Australia plans to fly some of its people to Christmas Island, quarantining them far off the coast. Even in this crisis atmosphere, Chinese President Xi Jinping insists the devil virus will be beat. The Chinese people, he says, are now in a serious battle against the epidemic. Xi met with the head of the World Health Organization, who has been praising Beijing for its handling of the crisis. And yet, more than a month after the first infections in Wuhan, there is no end in sight, no sure way to slow this virus, which experts say may not peak in China for weeks. Sasha Petrusek, CBC News, Beijing.
Now, the vast majority of coronavirus cases outside China were imported. That means the person was infected inside China. But there are now cases of transmission happening beyond China's borders. Germany today confirmed a man who had never been to China caught the coronavirus after contact with a coworker. Similar cases have cropped up in Vietnam and Japan.
Staying with China now, we turn to the Huawei dilemma. 5G telecom networks are the future, and the Chinese tech giant is getting there faster. That's alarmed Washington, forcing countries, including Canada, to choose between a top ally and a quicker road to the cutting edge. As Aaron Collins explains now, the UK has made that choice.
Is Huawei a security risk?
The question for the UK's National Security Council, what to do about Huawei? Should the Chinese company help build England's 5G network? The answer, yes, but with limits.
To ensure the security of 5G and full fibre networks, it's both necessary and proportionate to place tight restrictions on the presence of any companies identified as high risk.
Huawei's share of the UK network capped at 35%, and the firm can't operate around nuclear or military sites, a nod to concerns over security from the US, which has locked the company out of its 5G network.
This is about risk management. I personally am willing to trust the advice of the British security experts that this is doable.
Doable and likely essential for Prime Minister Boris Johnson, getting 5G online, a key election promise.
This part of central London is one of the few parts of the UK that's already supposed to have 5G, and it's not that fast. Getting the rest of the country up to speed affordably will likely take Huawei's help.
Huawei was already involved in the UK's 3 and 4G networks, so shutting them out now would mean building 5G will take longer and cost a lot more. Canada faces a similar dilemma.
Should Canada let Huawei get involved with their 5G network?
I think they should look at that very seriously, because of the networks are very much integrated across the border with the US networks, and I think the US may have something to say about it.
And the US has already had a lot to say about Huawei, with some politicians warning that embracing the company could impact intelligence sharing with the US.
Allowing Huawei to control the 5G networks in countries like the UK or in the United States of America is a dangerous path forward.
Prime Minister Boris Johnson is likely to hear more on that tomorrow when he's set to meet the U.S. Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo. Aaron Collins, CBC News, London.
Of the so-called Five Eyes intelligence partners, the U.S. position on Huawei is clear. Australia and New Zealand followed Washington's lead back in 2018. We now know the UK is hedging, so that leaves Canada, which today continues to keep everyone in suspense.
We haven't made any final determination. Each country has their own assessments to make.
There's important discussions taking place about what will be right for Canadians, and when that decision has been made, I'll be happy to share.
We're working with our Five Eyes allies, working with international partners, looking at the security concerns, and we will take the advice of our security experts on that.
The security issues, the hype, and the hard call. We have a lot more coming on 5G and Huawei later in the show.
U.S. President Donald Trump calls his new Middle East peace plan the deal of the century. But Palestinian leaders say it's no deal at all. Paul Hunter takes us through the divided reaction.
Word of Donald Trump's plan for peace in the Middle East quickly brought precisely the opposite. Indeed, as Trump laid out his proposal in Washington, Palestinians were watching carefully.
My vision presents a win-win opportunity for both sides.
In the White House, with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu at his side, but no Palestinians in the room, Trump laid out a dramatic plan. Significantly, it calls for the creation within Israel of a Palestinian state, marked here in green. And though a number of Israelis reject such an idea, the map has Netanyahu's blessing.
This is an unprecedented and highly significant development.
But most of the many details in the plan are historically untenable to Palestinians, including that the U.S. recognizes all Israeli settlements in the West Bank, though there's to be a 4-year freeze on the growth of settlements to allow for more negotiations. Trump's plan also gives Israel sovereignty in the fertile Jordan Valley, and it requires Palestinians broadly to disarm and to dismantle the militant groups Hamas and Islamic Jihad. Then there's the fate of Jerusalem, a highly contentious issue. It's the city Israelis and Palestinians both want as their capital. On Jerusalem, Trump was clear.
Jerusalem will remain Israel's undivided, very important, undivided capital.
That brought sustained applause for the president, who added the Palestinian capital would be in eastern Jerusalem, far from what Palestinians want and on the other side of a concrete security wall. Said Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas tonight in Ramallah, Jerusalem is not for sale. Said Netanyahu to Trump this afternoon,
"You have been the greatest friend that Israel has ever had in the White House."
Okay, so Paul, where do things go from here?
Well, the challenge in answering that is that few people think this will actually go anywhere, given how Palestinians seem to have quickly rejected it. Indeed, a number of critics have already dismissed the plan as little more than a diversion tactic from both Trump and Netanyahu, both with reason to try and change the headlines these days. Trump with his impeachment trial going on, while Netanyahu has troubles of his own in Israel, today formally indicted on corruption charges, facing an election in a few weeks. Nonetheless, Trump wants the Palestinian leadership to at least look at his proposal, but as you noted earlier, consider that in previewing it yesterday, Trump called the plan the deal of the century. Tonight, Palestinian Prime Minister Mahmoud Abbas called it the slap of the century. Andrew.
Paul Hunter in Washington. Thanks very much.
So you heard Paul mention that impeachment trial. Well, it continued today in the U.S. Senate, both sides having now made their opening arguments. But as Katie Simpson tells us, the leaked manuscripts of Trump's former national security advisor have clearly thrown a curveball into the already unusual proceedings.
It is time for this to end.
In what could be their last chance to vigorously defend the president, Donald Trump's lawyers argued he did nothing wrong.
The bar for impeachment cannot be set this low.
But Trump's team was forced off message, having to again acknowledge the damning allegations from former National Security Advisor John Bolton. As reported by the New York Times, in the manuscript of his upcoming book, Bolton writes Trump withheld military aid for Ukraine to pressure its new president to dig up dirt on the Bidens.
You cannot impeach a president on an unsourced allegation.
While Trump denies the allegation, his defense is being undercut by a high-profile ally. Former White House Chief of Staff John Kelly told an audience in Florida, "If John Bolton says that in the book, I believe John Bolton, and that most Americans want to hear from him."
There's been a steady drip, drip, drip of information. The truth leaking out in one explosive article after another. In that sense, this is reminiscent of Watergate.
Democrats and even some Republicans now appear open to voting in favor of allowing new witnesses to testify.
I don't think they're all settled as a group or as individuals as to exactly how they're going to vote, but I'd like to hear from John Bolton.
If a majority of senators do vote to have Bolton appear under oath, Trump's team is already undermining the importance of what he may say.
Nothing in the Bolton revelations, even if true, would rise to the level of abuse of power or an impeachable offense.
Tonight, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell told Republicans behind closed doors he doesn't have enough votes to block witnesses. Katie Simpson, CBC News, Washington.
Before voting about witnesses, though, senators will have a chance to ask questions about both sides' opening arguments. So that will happen tomorrow and Thursday. Then on Friday, they could vote to consider additional testimony or evidence. From there, the whole trial could wrap up within a few days or get extended to consider all the new testimony or evidence.
Well, a powerful earthquake today felt all the way from Florida to Mexico. Ahead on The National, the aftershocks and the aftermath.
Plus, as Canada grapples with how to build a 5G network, we take a closer look at what the technology really promises.
Is 5G a game changer?
And a year after giving CBC an interview meant missing his chance to meet his idol, Vince Carter. Better late than never. We're back in 2.
Hi, everyone. Thanks. This is really cool. For those of you who are hoping it was someone else like Shawn Mendes, I'm sorry. It is me. You're stuck with me.
A very modest introduction. Not that she needs one. Alessia Cara already has a Grammy, a couple of Junos, but now she can add host to her list of accomplishments. The singer-songwriter from Brampton will take center stage at this year's Junos, and she's the top nominee with nods in 6 categories, including Album of the Year. Now, at just 23 years old, Cara will be the youngest woman to host the show. And as Deanna Sumanak-Johnson explains, she'll be joined on stage by a lot of other young talent.
Please welcome the host of the 2020 Juno Awards, Alessia Cara.
Alessia Cara has a lot to be excited about. She's part of a powerful new generation of female performers.
We see it in Billie Eilish, we see it in Lizzo, we see it in Ariana Grande. We do deserve to be acknowledged more because we've done so much for music, but it's just really good to see women being like, this is me, and I think it's going to be great for a lot of young girls coming up to have those role models to look up to.
Award shows like the Grammys and the Junos are also fighting to stay relevant to a young audience that doesn't watch TV or buy records. The Junos plan to solve the problem just might be nominating more fresh faces.
Sweet Little Lies, Bulo, Lennon Stella.
Names like Bulo and Lennon Stella, both just 20 years old, broke through on streaming platforms and YouTube.
Young, a lot of new talent. There is 70 first-time nominees, and that's amazing.
But some feel there's still room for improvement. The Grammys continue to face criticism for ignoring the genres of music dominated by Black artists. And some say the Junos could do better too.
To be completely honest, when they were kind of announcing the nominees, I was wondering where's the R&B, recording of the year, and why is it always left towards the end? And even though it is acknowledged, it's really not as prominent as I feel that it should be.
R&B music will be represented among the performers. Daniel Caesar, who already has both a Juno and a Grammy, will be among the talent performing at the March 15th show. Deanna Sumanak-Johnson, CBC News, Toronto.
Now to some other stories making news across the country tonight. Conservative leadership candidate Peter MacKay has announced he will march in this year's Pride Parade in Toronto. MacKay said he has already applied for permission to participate. If he wins, he'd become the first Conservative leader to do so. Fellow candidate Aaron O'Toole says he is also willing to march in Pride parades, but he would avoid the Toronto March because of its current policy of excluding uniformed police officers. And Manitoba native and former NHL star Eddie the Eagle Belfour has been arrested on mischief and intoxication charges. It happened at the Kentucky Grand Hotel and Spa. The person who called police said Belfour had been drinking and tried to fight a hotel employee before trying to force his way into the hotel spa. Police say Belfour did not cooperate when officers tried to handcuff him. And members of Canada's armed forces arrived back in New Brunswick today after more than a week spent in Newfoundland cleaning up following that record-breaking blizzard. Plenty of gratitude for the more than 400 troops who helped shovel out hundreds of homes.
Well, streaming services like Netflix are producing a ton of shows here in Canada.
Does that mean new opportunities for writers trying to break into it?
No, absolutely no.
Ahead, why some say a boom in Canada actually just means we lose big time.
First, though, as Ottawa weighs its options for a new 5G network, we look at the concerns over Huawei.
Are there risks? Absolutely.
That's next on The National. Welcome back. As you saw earlier, the UK opened its doors to Huawei today, if only slightly. The underlying message that the UK cannot say no to what Huawei is selling, 5G, that next big thing in mobile networks, and what major world economies hope will leap them into a connected society unlike ever before. But is that just a dream? As Thomas Daigle explains, every promise of 5G comes with an asterisk.
There's a lot of promise around 5G, or the fifth generation of mobile network technology, but it's not clear how much of the promises are hype.
For example, is it faster? Depends.
Promise is that it will be way faster, maybe even 100 times faster than what you get now. But there's a catch. While current signals can go far and through objects like buildings, super fast 5G can't go as far.
4G is just about one technology. Here we have a constellation of technologies that are working under the umbrella of 5G. We need to have multiple antennas, we need to have higher frequencies.
So more cell towers will have to be built for that super fast connectivity.
Next up, is 5G a game changer?
The promise is a more connected society, no less, with driverless cars, smart traffic lights to keep congestion down, and artificial intelligence managing it all. Sure, a 5G network could power this future, but not without time, money, innovation, not to mention permission from governments.
The promise of 5G that gets touted so much is that it's going to change a lot of the ways we do things. That's going to depend a lot on the people who are developing the applications that require 5G.
More realistically, 5G will offer better connectivity for your phone, tablet, or laptop rather than an entire smart city.
The last promise is 5G ready right now.
Well, not without new phones, which need new towers, which need new 5G modems, creating supply and demand. That's expensive, so the Canadian telecom industry plans on spending $26 billion over the next few years, estimating 5G will add $40 billion to Canada's GDP. But keep in mind, for some Canadians, 5G may never be ready.
Unfortunately, there's still a lot of rural areas that are underserved by 4G. And even though the carriers are talking about using 5G for closing that digital divide, we haven't really seen a performance like that in the past that gives us a lot of confidence that that's likely to happen in the near future.
Don't lose hope on this promising new technology. Just like 3G gave us apps and 4G gave us streaming, there may be another mobile revolution around the corner. Thomas Daigle, CBC News, Toronto.
So clearly the hope of 5G is that it will eventually connect every corner of society. But while Huawei wants to be a major supplier, there are concerns it gives China a backdoor to spy through. The US, Australia, Japan, they're all hard-nosed. But Germany, Norway, India, and today the UK, they're more open to Huawei. So how real is the risk? The video is not that sophisticated. What these Chinese cyber experts are doing in it, though, well, that's pretty chilling. They've hacked into a Tesla, are controlling it from afar. Its speed, its wipers, even its brakes. And Tesla doesn't seem to mind. It offered them a reward for finding the flaws. Some of these hacks were a few years ago, meaning the threats will grow more sophisticated, and it's not just Tesla that needs to pay attention.
It could be catastrophic. It could be a situation where the car doesn't detect that there's a sidewalk, doesn't detect that they need to slow down, doesn't detect they have to speed up, doesn't detect there's an object there. If 5G is realized, these are the actual kinds of security threats that we need to be mindful of.
Chris Parsons is the sort of person looked to for advice on 5G and security. He's a researcher with the Citizen Lab at the Monk School in Toronto. Assessing cyber safety, the fate of our data, is his everyday. 5G, he maintains, will have implications decades into the future. Think about the roads again, he urges. To move people through them more efficiently with less fuel consumption, fewer accidents, fewer human drivers, will require sensor networks that connect the roadways to all the vehicles in real time. That will take a robust and reliable 5G network.
I think one of the things that we need to think about is there's this national security arm. So third-party state, manipulate the equipment to, detour the prime minister's vehicle into a ditch or something worse. But there's also a baseline concern is the technology secure?
Is Canada ready to have Huawei behind that 5G network? Nordic firms Nokia and Ericsson do 5G as well, but Huawei is the biggest, fastest growing, and one of the most studied providers. Ohio-based Finite State evaluates the software code embedded in devices so companies know the risks before buying equipment. Hundreds of those devices have been Huawei products. And Matt Wickhouse says he found serious security flaws, including backdoors that could allow someone to take over Huawei equipment.
We were able to quantitatively show that about a little bit over half of the devices we analyzed had some form of backdoor access vulnerability. Had software that was close to 20 years old inside of it, sloppy security practices. So we could see that the developers at Huawei were not necessarily making security conscious decisions when they were building these products.
He makes the point it doesn't matter why there are vulnerabilities, accidental or intentional, the potential harm is the same.
Huawei is not the only telco equipment manufacturer that has vulnerabilities in their equipment. We just see more in Huawei than others. The vulnerabilities that we're finding are so easy to find that anyone that would want to exploit them could potentially do that. Whether that's Chinese intelligence, whether that's Russian intelligence, whether that's a hacker group, from somewhere else around the world.
If the vulnerabilities are so clear, who else knows about them? It seems Huawei does. It funds the Huawei Cybersecurity Evaluation Centre in the UK, which has an oversight board, including UK cybersecurity officials and Cabinet Office representatives. The board's 2019 report raises concerns about Huawei's software development and adds, no material progress has been made on the issues raised in the previous 2018 report. It concluded it could only provide limited assurance that all risks to UK national security from Huawei's involvement in the UK's critical networks can be sufficiently mitigated long term. Even so, the UK decided today not to ban Huawei from being involved in its 5G network. It is comfortable with the call. Wickhouse has questions. If, as he insists, many of the problems he says his team spotted aren't that hard to fix, why isn't Huawei fixing them?
They don't know how, or they're choosing not to. And it may be that they're just focused on delivering low-cost solutions with lots of features, and the thing that they're sacrificing is security.
Huawei is clear it stands by its work.
There is no evidence out there that shows that Huawei's products are more vulnerable than Nokia, Ericsson, or the other competitors.
Andy Purdy was once the senior cybersecurity official for the U.S. government. He's now the chief security officer for Huawei USA.
We're pleased that we are subject to such scrutiny around the world. It's really a good thing, and it really helps us. And to be perfectly honest, we think our competitors would benefit from the same kind of scrutiny. Improvements to security are a continuing thing. It's not something that's going to end at some point. We believe we're in a very strong position. We believe that the software engineering revamp that we're doing is going to help very much with the consistency of the security of our products.
Technological integrity is only one concern about Huawei. Canada has to confront a layer of suspicion, not about the company itself, but about China's reach.
China has passed legislation that can compel Chinese domiciled companies, including Huawei obviously, to make modifications in the service of national security interests for the Chinese government. So are there risks? Absolutely.
One of the key issues is on whether we'd be forced to turn over data to the China government. Well, the fact is, we don't have the data. We can't be forced to turn over data we don't have. And the fact is the processes in place for whether, when, and how we're going to provide support to a Canadian telecom operator are very, very strict.
Huawei is not just making assurances, it has warnings about what happens if Canada says no.
Our technology is the best in the world, and it's not just about speed. It's about how much data comes in a certain period of time. It's about latency. It's about the thousands and thousands of connections that can be made. It's about enabling economic growth in Canada. The financial impact on Canada can be very substantial if Huawei's not allowed to compete.
So consider Canada's calculations now. Economic growth, security, geopolitics of trade deals, Meng Wanzhou's case, the detention of 2 Canadian citizens in China. All issues unavoidably entangled in the decision. And now, the Americans threaten to cut off intelligence sharing if Canada signs on with Huawei.
Canada is a net importer of intelligence. So the risk is if we do acquire Huawei equipment, if we do install it, we may lose a huge trough of intelligence that we rely on to protect ourselves.
Somewhere there may be a decision that satisfies no one entirely, but doesn't entirely offend either. If that exists, Canada is likely looking for it right now. And that solution needs to come soon. Bell and TELUS have tested 5G Huawei tech. TELUS has said a ban would seriously affect its bottom line. Bell's new CEO has said the company would like to work with Huawei and wants clarity from the government. Rogers is using Sweden-based Ericsson for its 5G deployment.
And ahead on The National, a blessing and a curse. Big American streaming companies are producing a lot of content here in Canada, but you'll hear from Canadians who believe that's bad news.
And later, a CBC reporter rights a wrong. A year after he accidentally made a man miss the chance to meet his NBA hero. Tonight's moment is a moment of redemption.
Tomorrow, we're expecting to hear the CRTC's take on companies like Netflix. American streaming giants are increasingly carving out real estate here in Canada. But one of the biggest gripes of producers here is that those giants are taking Canadian money without giving back. Eli Glasner explains.
From teenage witches to surly superheroes, the hunger for content has studios in Toronto and Vancouver running at full capacity.
I don't even know exactly what we're building down here.
This is what the streaming boom looks like. On the soundstage for The Expanse, they're building sets as quickly as they can. The Expanse executive producer says it's never been easier to reach viewers.
The opportunities for local content have never been better. And all of the companies are trying to go to different places to get different voices.
Netflix has to commit.
But talk to Canadian creators and the rosy picture changes.
And I have never seen it like this.
According to research from the Writers Guild of Canada, in the past 5 years, the number of scripted shows made for private broadcasters has dropped dramatically, while the number of U.S. shows made here jumped up nearly 300%.
Does that mean new opportunities for writers trying to break into it?
No, absolutely no.
Yeah.
And so if Netflix is only doing service production, they hire from LA. They're not hiring from Toronto or Vancouver, other than the odd exception.
They have to go where the work is.
They have to, they have families, they have mortgages.
Part of the problem is Canadian producers and writers and directors all say that Netflix and other streamers have an unfair advantage. Traditional broadcasters pay into the Canada Media Fund, which helps create new shows. Netflix is taking money from over 6 million Canadian subscribers, but doesn't contribute to the fund. But in 2017, Netflix did agree to spend $500 million over 5 years on Canadian productions.
Netflix will create Netflix Canada.
A drop in the bucket, says this producer.
They're getting a great deal with access to our market, and like the French, like the British, like every other country in the world except America, all we're saying is they should be leaving something here.
Now, after years of Canadian producers asking the government to update regulations, an expert panel is expected to release a report recommending streaming companies contribute to content creation funds. For its part, Netflix doesn't consider itself a broadcaster and doesn't believe it should pay. On the street, we asked Netflix subscribers if they'd pay more for Canadian content.
I personally wouldn't enjoy that.
It's like 15 now.
Yeah, now it's gone up like quite a bit.
Yeah, probably, because like there's not that much Canadian stuff on like Netflix.
And you'd pay a little more?
Maybe, maybe $1 or $2, but if it's more than that, maybe not.
The report is expected by the end of the month. Eli Glasner, CBC News, Toronto.
Here are some other stories making news around the world tonight.
Big earthquake going on. Look at this.
The powerful 7.7 magnitude earthquake struck in the Caribbean Sea between Jamaica, Cuba, and the Cayman Islands. No initial reports of significant damage. In Jamaica's capital city, employees evacuated to the street. That quake was felt as far away as Miami. Several strong aftershocks have been felt, including one measuring 6.1. And severe rainstorms in southeastern Brazil have killed nearly 50 people and left thousands more displaced. The rain started falling on Friday, continued through the weekend, leading to widespread flooding in the region. Rescue workers continue to search for a number of people who are still missing. At the height of the storm, more than 100 cities declared states of emergency. And these extraordinary scenes are in France. They were today as riot police clashed with uniformed firefighters protesting in the French capital. Police were seen using batons and shields against thousands of angry demonstrators. This is part of a long-running protest movement demanding better pay and conditions. Police eventually brought in a water cannon to disperse them.
And in New York City, a new witness takes the stand in the Harvey Weinstein trial. The case against Weinstein helped spark the Me Too movement, but what's changed at workplaces here in Canada? We look at that next on The National.
I'm Jamie Poisson, and tomorrow on CBC's daily news podcast Front Burner, what a proposed open-pit mine twice the size of Vancouver says about the future of the Alberta oil sands. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
Harvey Weinstein was back in a New York courtroom this morning. There, the former movie mogul stands accused of sexually assaulting a production assistant in 2006. Today, the woman's former roommate took the stand to corroborate her allegations. Weinstein is also charged with raping an aspiring actress in 2013. Now, that case helped usher in the Me Too movement, and women increasingly came forward with their own stories of sexual harassment. Diane Buckner now looks at what's changed in Canada since then.
She was a senior IT systems analyst, experienced and highly paid. Nowadays, Sarah is on a long-term disability leave. We're not identifying her because she says she was sexually harassed on the job.
He just grabbed me and put his arm on my shoulder like this, really close to here. And his face was so close to me. And I got extremely uncomfortable, so I pushed him away. I said, "No, what you doing?"
She says it was one of her bosses who got physical.
And that's not the worst part. They actually forced me back to work with him within 2 hours after I complained sexual harassment.
She went to her union, no luck there either. Sarah ended up in hospital with anxiety and depression. Some sexual harassment cases feature famous names or big settlements, like the $100 million the RCMP paid to settle a class action harassment lawsuit. But there are countless lesser-known cases in Canada.
It is ubiquitous. It happens everywhere. In the wake of Me Too, there have been all sorts of surveys from every type of workplace that you can imagine, and it's rampant.
Employment lawyer Janice Rubin was hired by CBC to investigate the Ghomeshi case. She says a new federal law is coming this year.
The employer has to actually proactively look at the workplace and figure out where the risk is.
Bill C-65 spells out new responsibilities for all federally regulated industries, such as communications, transportation, the public service, to prevent workplace violence and harassment.
And we all know that the legislation requires us to have a policy and a program in place, but how do you do that in your workplace?
This group of human resources professionals are attending a seminar about the new rules.
We have a duty as organizations, as employers, to protect workers from hazards.
This has to be solved. This is an indicia of inequality. These are old behaviors from an old type of workplace that still haven't disappeared.
The Weinstein court case has already resulted in other victims in other workplaces coming forward. Now, Canadian employers better get ready to prevent new cases from ever happening. Diane Buckner, CBC News, Toronto.
The moment is coming up next on The National. When he agreed to a CBC interview last year, he had no idea doing it would mean missing the chance to meet his NBA idol. Time to make it better. That's next.
I'm Raptors for life, but Vince Carter is my Michael Jordan.
That man, Herman Hodges, is a Vince Carter superfan. He has been trying for 20 years to meet Carter and got so close last year. He was waiting in the perfect place when we at CBC screwed it up. Greg Ross innocently pulled Herman aside for a quick interview at exactly the wrong moment.
We go back to the area, and the two other fans that were waiting, I said, hey, did anyone come out? And they said, yeah. I said, oh, who? Vince. I said, oh.
Ouch. So Vince Carter now plays for the Atlanta Hawks, and ahead of tonight's game against the Raptors, Greg Ross had an idea. He needed to make it up to Herman. We all did, really. So that is our moment.
How's everything? Appreciate meeting you, man. My pleasure. I just want to say thank you, man, for everything you've done to the game. For me, as a young 8-year-old, when I first saw you put your arm in the rim, man, it cemented me. I coach junior varsity, so they're 9th and 10th graders, and when we're practicing and they're in the game and they start to get tired, I always tell them, hey, Vince is 43 and he's still playing.
He just wanted to see if you would sign his retro jersey.
For sure. I'm just internally grateful, man. Thank you. Hey, this is childhood come true.
Thank you, man. Here you go.
Do work
You're the
tonight.
best, buddy. Thank you so much.
You got you.
Thanks a lot. This is a Raptors fan who's not from Toronto, but he's been cheering for this team for 20 years. And did I redeem myself after kind of messing things up last year?
I say you take it. You did a great job. Nothing short of amazing.
I'm glad we could make that happen.
So are we. It's
good.
so
That's
embarrassing. So what happened is last year, Herman got, there was word that Vince Carter was going to retire, and Herman got a tip. I know where I can find him. So he came to Toronto. He waited in the right spot. He was patient with everybody else, and then, of course, innocently sabotaged that moment. Young Greg Ross did by pulling him aside, but he's an honorable man and he sorted it.
Yeah, but let this be a lesson to anyone out there. Do not cross Greg Ross. Otherwise, he will strike you down. He will mess with you. He will ruin your life. But then maybe if you play your cards right, he'll lift you right back up and make everything better.
Great Canadian.
That's the National for this January 28th. Have a great night.
Good night.